He came to return a book, a simple errand. But when she asked, "Are you in a hurry?" the air changed. What happened next would haunt him every quiet night. I stepped out of my old pickup truck, the engine coughing to a halt as the late afternoon sun hung low over the quiet streets of Riverton, a small town tucked away in the rolling hills of upstate New York. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass from neighboring lawns, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the maple trees lining the road. I'd driven this way only once before, about a month ago, when my buddy Theo insisted I tag along to his aunt's place. He was off at college now, chasing some engineering degree, but before he left, he'd lent me a book from her collection, a worn, leather-bound edition of existential philosophy that had been crucial for my final paper at the local community college. At 22, I was piecing together my life. Part-time shifts at the hardware store to pay the bills, late nights studying literature with vague dreams of transferring to a real university someday, maybe even writing something of my own. The book felt solid in my hands as I walked up the cracked concrete path to 47 Hawthorne Drive, past overgrown hydrangea bushes that bloomed wildly, their petals scattering like forgotten confetti. Her name was Leora Beckett, Theo's aunt on his mother's side. From what little Theo had shared, she lived alone here after losing her husband a couple of years back in a sudden accident. She was in her late 30s, around 38, I figured. Old enough to have that quiet poise that came from weathering storms I hadn't yet faced. I'd met her briefly during that first visit, exchanging awkward pleasantries while Theo rifled through her shelves. She had this understated beauty, dark hair often tied back, hazel eyes that seemed to hold depths of unspoken stories, and a way of moving that was graceful without trying. I rang the doorbell, shifting uncomfortably in my worn jeans and faded t-shirt, ready to hand over the book and bolt back to my routine. The door creaked open after a few seconds, and there she stood, in a simple gray sweater that hung loosely over her jeans, reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by a warm recognition. "Ellis? Theo's friend, isn't it? You've come to return the book?" "Yeah, that's right," I replied, extending it toward her like it was some fragile artifact. "Thanks for letting me borrow it. It made all the difference in my paper." She accepted it with care, her fingers grazing mine in a fleeting touch that sent an unexpected warmth up my arm, though I brushed it off as nothing. She glanced at the cover, a faint smile tugging at her lips, before placing it on the small entryway table cluttered with mail and a vase of wilting daisies. The house smelled of chamomile tea, mingled with the musty aroma of old books, a comforting haze that wrapped around me like an invitation I hadn't expected. "Theo mentions you often. Says you're quite the thinker. I'm glad it helped." I nodded, already half turning toward the door, eager to escape the odd pull of the moment. "Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to get it back safe." But she paused, her head tilting slightly as those hazel eyes met mine directly, holding me in place with an intensity that made my pulse quicken just a bit. "Are you in a hurry?" The question was simple, casual even, but it lingered in the air between us, laced with something I couldn't quite name. Was I? My evening stretched out, empty ahead. No classes, no shifts until morning, just my cramped apartment on Elmwood Lane waiting with its stack of unread novels and a frozen dinner. "Not particularly," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could second-guess them. "Why do you ask?" Her smile deepened faintly, and she stepped aside, gesturing inward. "Come in for a cup of tea, then. It's been one of those quiet days, and a little company wouldn't hurt, unless you've got somewhere to be." I hesitated on the threshold, my mind flashing to Theo, to the age gap that suddenly felt like a chasm. Me, barely out of my teens in spirit, and her, a woman who'd built and lost a life already. But curiosity won out, or maybe it was the loneliness I sensed echoing in her voice. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me with a finality that made my stomach twist. The living room unfolded before me. Towering bookshelves crammed with volumes of every genre, a worn leather couch facing an unlit fireplace mantel adorned with faded photos and sunlight streaming through lace curtains, dancing in patterns on the polished hardwood floors. It felt lived in, intimate, like stepping into someone's private world uninvited. She led me to the kitchen, a cozy nook with a wooden table buried under manuscripts and a humming laptop, the counters lined with mismatched mugs and a half-eaten apple. As she filled the kettle at the sink, her movements were unhurried, deliberate, like she was buying time for her own thoughts. "How are your studies coming along?" she asked over the rush of water, glancing back at me. "Decent enough," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting, my hands fidgeting with the edge of the table. "Wrapping up the semester. Philosophy's tough, but that book you lent, it cleared up a lot." At my age, everything felt like a scramble, figuring out who I was beyond the part-time gigs and late-night cramming. Leora, though, moved with the assurance of someone who'd navigated deeper waters, her maturity showing in the subtle creases around her eyes when she smiled, the way she held herself straight even in this casual setting. The kettle whistled sharply, breaking the momentary silence, and she poured steaming water into 2 mugs, adding a lemon slice to hers with a practiced flick. "Sugar for yours?" she offered, sliding my mug across the table, the ceramic warm against my palms. "Black is fine, thanks." I took a sip, the heat grounding me as we eased into conversation about books, safe ground. I mentioned a few favorites, like the surreal worlds of Murakami and the sharp insights of Zadie Smith. She listened intently, her eyes lighting up as she shared about editing a novel last year that echoed those styles. "It's fulfilling work," she said, stirring her tea slowly, "but it can be so isolating. Days turn into weeks, just you and the pages." There was a subtle undercurrent in her tone, a hint of solitude that tugged at me. I didn't push, but I found myself opening up more than usual, about my parents' messy divorce when I was a kid, how it left me shuttling between homes until I finally struck out alone at 18. "Reading's my escape," I confessed. "Dives into someone else's mess make mine seem manageable." She nodded, her gaze steady and understanding. "I know that feeling well. After my husband passed, books were my anchor. They kept the silence from swallowing me whole." Her words were matter of fact, but her grip on the mug tightened, knuckles whitening slightly. Theo had skimmed over the details, a car crash on a slick winter road, but hearing it from her made the loss feel tangible, raw. "I'm really sorry," I said quietly, meeting her eyes. "That must have been devastating." She shrugged, though her expression softened with a mix of gratitude and lingering pain. "It was. Still catches me off guard some days. But you keep moving, right?" A beat of silence followed, the wall clock ticking like a heartbeat in the background. Then she stood, rinsing her mug at the sink. "Want to see the garden out back? It's nothing grand, but the roses are in full bloom this time of year." I followed her through the creaky screen door, stepping into a modest backyard enclosed by a weathered wooden fence. The garden was a patchwork of color, rose bushes exploding in reds and pinks, climbing a trellis against the house, their thorns glinting in the fading light. She knelt to yank a stubborn weed, and without thinking, I joined her, pulling on a pair of gardening gloves she handed me from a nearby shelf. "Watch the thorns. They're sharper than they look," she warned, her voice light but close as we worked side by side. Our hands brushed now and then as we reached for the same spots, each contact sending a faint ripple through me, an awareness that built quietly. She talked about planting these roses with her husband years ago, how they'd bickered over the varieties but ended up cherishing the chaotic blend. "Memories like that," she said softly, her eyes distant. "They're equal parts comfort and ache." I shared a memory of my own, helping my grandfather tend his vegetable plot as a boy, before he got sick and everything changed. Talking to her felt effortless, unlike the superficial chats with people my age, all surface and no substance. Leora drew out stories with her quiet questions, her responses thoughtful, making me feel heard in a way that was rare. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass, She straightened up, dusting dirt from her jeans. "You've been a tremendous help. Stay for dinner? I've got pasta ingredients, nothing elaborate, but it'd be nice to share." I should have declined, headed back to my solitary evening. But that initial question lingered in my mind, pulling me deeper. "If it's no trouble," I said, following her inside. We prepared the meal together, her chopping garlic and tomatoes while I set the table, the kitchen filling with savory aromas that made the space feel alive. Over dinner, the talk deepened. She asked about my aspirations, and I admitted my secret hope to write someday, though self-doubt always crept in. "You're still young," she replied gently, her voice warm. "Plenty of time to chase those dreams. At 38, you start wondering about the paths not taken." The age difference hit me then, stark and undeniable. 16 years of life she'd lived that I hadn't. She'd known love, built a home, endured grief. I was just starting to grasp the edges of adulthood. Yet, sharing this meal, laughing over small things, it didn't feel like an obstacle. It felt like a bridge. Afterward, as we cleared the dishes, our elbows bumped in the narrow sink, and she chuckled softly at my clumsy attempt to scrub a pan. Her hand rested briefly on my arm, steadying me. "Thank you for staying, Ellis. It's been refreshing not to face the evening alone." The touch lingered in my mind, innocent yet charged, as I finally made my way to the door. The hallway was dimly lit, shadows playing on the walls. "Drive carefully," she said, her tone low and sincere. I paused at the threshold, turning back. "Leora, this was nice. Really." She smiled, but her eyes held a depth of emotion that mirrored the confusion stirring in me. What had started as a quick errand had unfolded into something unforeseen, leaving me with a quiet ache I couldn't name. This was only the beginning. But he still had no idea how quickly things could spiral out of control. I woke the next morning with the remnants of the previous evening clinging to me like a fog that wouldn't lift. My apartment on Elmwood Lane was a stark contrast to Leora's warm home. A single room in an aging brick building on the outskirts of Riverton, with peeling wallpaper and a window that rattled in the wind. The town itself felt smaller today, its familiar streets winding through the hills like veins in a body I knew too well. At 22, my life was a patchwork of uncertainties, scraping by with shifts at Harper's Hardware on Main Street, chipping away at my literature degree, and nursing dreams that felt more like distant echoes than plans. But last night had shifted something inside me. I'd left her place late, after lingering on the porch watching fireflies flicker in the garden, our conversation weaving through books and losses until the stars emerged. Nothing overt had happened, just shared wine, easy laughter, and that lingering touch on my arm. Yet, as I lay there staring at the ceiling cracks, her question echoed. "Are you in a hurry?" It had unraveled my evening, and now it tugged at the edges of my thoughts. I dragged myself through the morning routine, a quick shower in the temperamental bathroom, coffee from a chipped mug, and a glance at my phone for any messages. Nothing from Theo. He was buried in college midterms, but the memory of Leora's hazel eyes, flecked with gold and guarded wisdom, kept surfacing. She was in her late 30s, a woman shaped by marriage, career, and grief, while I was still fumbling through the basics of independence. The gap felt like a warning, a moral line I shouldn't cross, especially with her being family to my best friend. What would Theo think if he knew I'd stayed for dinner, let alone felt that subtle pull? I pushed the thoughts down as I headed to work, the drive through Riverton's leafy suburbs a blur of familiar sights. The old mill by the river, kids biking to school, the distant hum of traffic on the highway. At Harper's Hardware, the store buzzed with Saturday energy, customers browsing aisles for paint rollers, garden tools, and light bulbs. I stocked shelves mechanically, my mind elsewhere, stacking cans of varnish while replaying her laughter, the way she'd listened like my words mattered. My co-worker Finn, a burly guy in his 40s with a perpetual grease stain on his shirt, clapped me on the back. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink, kid. Rough night out?" "Something like that," I muttered, forcing a grin as I arranged screwdrivers. I wasn't one to spill personal details, especially when they tangled with confusion like this. At my age, relationships were supposed to be straightforward, dates with classmates, casual flings, but this felt different, layered with forbidden undertones. The age difference nagged at me. She saw the world through lenses polished by experience, while I was still wiping fog from mine. Yet the connection had felt real, not just polite small talk. By midday, during my break in the cramped back room surrounded by boxes of inventory, my phone vibrated. I expected a reminder from a study group, but it was an unknown number. "Hi, Ellis. Leora here. Theo passed along your contact." I forgot to mention yesterday. The bookshelf in my study is unstable, might topple any day. Could you take a look? No pressure if you're busy. My thumb hovered over the screen, heart picking up pace. A bookshelf? It sounded practical, neighborly even, but after last night, every interaction carried weight. Helping her felt like stepping closer to that line, yet refusing seemed rude, cowardly. I typed back, "I can come by after work. Around 5 work for you?" Her reply was prompt. "Ideal. Appreciate it." The afternoon crawled. Each customer query, recommendations for plumbing fixes or electrical tape, pulling me further into anticipation. I grabbed a level and brackets from the store's stock on my way out, justifying it as preparation. Driving back to Hawthorne Drive, the sun slanted through the hills, turning the landscape golden and making the drive feel longer than its 20 minutes. Her sedan sat in the driveway. A bumper sticker from a book festival, faded but visible, a reminder of her world. She opened the door in a light blue blouse tucked into slacks, her dark hair loose and cascading over her shoulders, softening her features. "Ellis, thank you for this. I hate to impose, but Theo said you're good with fixes, like that bike of his you patched up." "No imposition," I said, stepping inside, the familiar scent of tea and books enveloping me. She guided me to the study, a room I hadn't entered before, walls dominated by shelves, a cluttered desk with glowing laptop, and a window framing the garden's roses. The problematic bookshelf loomed tall, oak frame groaning under the weight of tomes, tilting ominously. "Brackets are probably shot," I assessed, setting my tools down. "Won't take too long to stabilize." She watched as I began unloading books, passing them to her for stacking on the Persian rug. Our fingers brushed repeatedly in the confined space. Accidental, yet each time it sparked a quiet awareness, like static in the air. "Impressive library," I noted, eyeing titles on ancient history, poetry collections, and obscure novels. "Decades in the making," she replied, kneeling to organize the piles, her blouse shifting slightly with the movement. "Reading's my refuge. What's next on your list?" Conversation flowed as I worked, tightening screws and checking alignment with the level. She recounted editing tales, amusing battles over punctuation with stubborn authors, heartfelt ones about stories that mirrored her own heartaches. "After Jonah's accident," she said quietly, her voice catching on her husband's name. "Work became my shield, better than crumbling." I stopped hammering, the tool heavy in my hand. "How long were you two together?" "From college, 12 years married." Her eyes held a quiet storm of fondness and regret. "You have a bit of his spark, you know. That thoughtful quiet." Though younger, of course, the comparison unsettled me, a compliment wrapped in complexity. Being likened to her late husband at my age felt both honoring and off-limits, stirring a guilt I couldn't shake. "I'm not sure I measure up," I said, focusing on the shelf to mask the heat rising in my cheeks. She rose, dusting her hands. "It's meant kindly. He was kind too." A heavy pause filled the room, charged with unsaid things. Then she brightened. "Lemonade? Freshly made." In the kitchen, we sat with glasses beating condensation, talk veering to favorites, films, travels she'd taken to literary conferences in Europe. Her laughter rang clear when I shared a bungled camping trip in the Adirondacks, her head tilting back, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. I caught myself staring, noting the way the light caught her hair, the maturity in her poise that drew me in despite the warnings in my head. As twilight deepened, she proposed pizza as thanks, and I stayed, the evening unfolding on the couch with slices in hand, an old black and white film playing. The room dimmed, TV flicker casting shadows, and she shifted nearer, our shoulders touching. "Chilly in here?" she asked, though the air was balmy. "A little," I lied, the proximity igniting a slow burn. We watched in hush, but at the end neither moved. "Tell me a truth," she said abruptly, facing me. "What's your deepest fear?" Her question pierced, pulling honesty from me. "Failing at it all, school, life, connections. Ending up trapped here, invisible." She nodded, vulnerability mirroring mine. "Mine's the same, post-Jonah. Numbness seemed safer than risking hurt again." Our gazes locked, the distance closing imperceptibly. I reached out, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. She inhaled sharply but held still, her hand covering mine briefly. "Ellis." A whisper, laced with caution and yearning. The tension crackled, my face inches from hers. But she stood suddenly, severing the moment. "It's getting late. You should head out." The abruptness stung, though gentle. "Right, sorry if I—" "It's fine." She escorted me to the door, her face a mask of conflict. "Thanks for everything." Outside, the night air cooled my flushed skin. Driving home, I dissected the near miss, questioning if I'd overstepped. Yet her touch haunted me, a thread left dangling. Sleep evaded me that night, the apartment's silence amplifying my restlessness. By noon the next day, off work, another text. "Ellis, about yesterday. We should talk. Come by?" I arrived mid-afternoon, the sun beating down relentlessly. She answered in a flowing sundress, eyes shadowed with fatigue but resolute. "Coffee's ready. Come in." We settled in the living room, steam rising from mugs, the air thick with unease. "I let things go too far last night," she began, staring into her cup. "You're so young, Ellis." "I'm not. And with Theo's connection, it's inappropriate." "I get it," I said, though it twisted inside. "But it doesn't feel wrong. Around you, I feel understood." Her eyes met mine, searching. "That's the danger. 2 years since Jonah, and opening my heart terrifies me." We delved deep then, hours unraveling fears, her dread of dishonoring memories, my insecurities about adequacy in her world. Tears welled in her eyes at one point, and I shifted to her side, arm around her shoulders. She leaned in, the contact a balm laced with fire. As sunset bathed the room in warm hues, she murmured, "Dinner again? I hate the solitude tonight." We cooked stir-fry collaboratively, our rhythms syncing effortlessly. Post-meal, during dishes, her hand found mine in the soapy water, fingers lacing. Turning to her, I kissed her, hesitant at first, then fervent, her response matching my intensity. She tasted of coffee and unspoken needs, her form yielding against mine. We parted, breathless. "We can't," she breathed, eyes contradicting her words. "Why fight what feels true?" I whispered. She led me back to the couch, where we held each other, whispers filling the night. No more advances, just profound closeness, her wisdom blending with my earnestness. As midnight loomed, her grip tightened. "Stay a while longer." I did, the night deepening our bond amid the quiet. Everything is heading toward a finale you can't brush off. What she does now will leave a lasting mark on him forever. The night pressed in around us, heavy and intimate, as we sat tangled on Leora's couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across her living room at 47 Hawthorne Drive. The clock on the mantel ticked past midnight, each second a quiet pulse in the stillness that wrapped us like a cocoon. Her hand rested on my arm, warm and grounding, while my fingers lingered in her hair, tracing its softness absent-mindedly. We'd been talking for hours, our voices low, sharing fragments of ourselves, dreams, regrets, moments that shaped us. At 22, I was still carving out my place in the world, my life a mix of community college deadlines, hardware store shifts, and a vague hope of writing something meaningful. Leora, at 38, carried a different weight. Years of love built with her late husband Jonah, the hollow ache of his loss, and the solitary rhythm of her freelance editing work. Her hazel eyes, flecked with gold and guarded wisdom, held mine with a vulnerability that mirrored the uncertainty churning inside me. "What are we doing, Ellis?" she asked, her voice a whisper, raw with the question we'd both been circling. I swallowed, my throat tight with the weight of her words. "I don't know," I admitted, my hand pausing on her shoulder. "I keep telling myself this is crazy. You're Theo's aunt. You've lived a whole life I can't even touch yet. But when I'm here with you, it feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The confession felt dangerous, like stepping onto thin ice, knowing the cracks could spread. Theo, my best friend since high school, was off at college, oblivious to the fact that I was sitting here, tangled up in feelings for his aunt, a woman 16 years my senior, whose life was woven with experiences I could only imagine. She shifted, her body still close but her gaze dropping to the couch, where her fingers traced the worn leather. "You're right. It's complicated. Theo would lose it if he knew. My sister, his mom, would think I've gone off the deep end, chasing something reckless after Jonah." Her voice caught on her husband's name and she took a shaky breath. 2 years since he died and I've been so careful, keeping my heart locked away. But you make me feel things I thought were buried. That scares me, Ellis. Her honesty hit me like a wave, stirring a mix of awe and guilt. I was just a kid in her eyes, or so I feared. Someone too young to offer anything substantial. Yet her words suggested otherwise, and the contradiction made my pulse race. "It scares me too," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "I'm not like Jonah was. I don't have a decade of life to bring to this. I'm figuring out who I am, barely keeping up with rent and classes. But when you look at me, I feel like I could be more." She lifted her eyes then, searching mine with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. "You remind me of him in some ways. His quiet passion, the way he'd listen like the world stopped for a moment. But you're not him. You're Ellis, and that's enough." Her hand moved to my chest, resting over my heart, feeling its quickening beat through my shirt. "What if we let this be what it is, just for tonight? No expectations, no tomorrows, just us." The suggestion hung between us, a fragile thread stretched taut. Outside, Riverton slept under a blanket of stars, the town's quiet streets a world away from the electricity in this room. I thought of the obstacles waiting beyond her door, Theo's inevitable return from college next week, the small-town gossip that could ignite if anyone saw my truck parked here too often, my own fears of falling short in a connection this profound. At my age, relationships were supposed to be fleeting, uncomplicated, but this was anything but. Leora was a widow, a woman who'd built a life and lost it, someone whose depth made my inexperience feel glaring. Yet, her touch grounded me, pulling me toward something I couldn't resist. I leaned in, my lips brushing hers, tentative at first, testing the boundary we'd both felt since that first evening. Her response was soft, but certain, her hands sliding to my shoulders, pulling me closer. The kiss deepened, a slow burn of need and restraint, her breath warm against my skin. My fingers found her hair, the strands slipping through like silk, and for a moment the world narrowed to just us. Two people caught in a tide neither could control. Her body pressed against mine, the curve of her waist fitting perfectly under my hands, and I felt the weight of her life, her losses, her quiet strength, all pouring into this shared space. We pulled back, breathless, her forehead resting against mine. "This is dangerous," she murmured, her voice a mix of warning and surrender. "You're so young, and I'm not. We shouldn't." "Then why does it feel like we should?" I whispered back, my thumb brushing her cheek. Her skin was warm, flushed, and her eyes held a storm of emotions, desire, fear, longing. The age gap loomed, a silent judge, but so did the undeniable pull between us. She didn't answer, instead taking my hand and leading me down the hallway to her bedroom, a space I'd only glimpsed before. The room was simple but intimate. A queen-sized bed with soft cream-colored linens, a nightstand cluttered with books, and a single framed photo of her and Jonah smiling on their wedding day. The sight of it stopped me cold, a reminder of the life she'd lived before me. I sat on the bed's edge, my hands clasped tightly. "Does this feel like you're betraying him?" I asked, my voice low, almost afraid of her answer. She sat beside me, picking up the photo with a tenderness that made my chest tighten. "No," she said after a long pause, her fingers tracing the frame's edge. "Jonah would want me to live, not just exist. This isn't about replacing him. It's about letting myself feel again." She set the photo down gently, facing me with a small, resolute smile. "You're helping me remember what that's like." Her words unlocked something in me, easing the guilt that had been gnawing at the edges. We lay down together, still clothed, her head resting on my chest as we talked into the early hours. She shared stories of her travels with Jonah, hiking in the Alps, getting lost in narrow Italian streets, while I opened up about my half-formed dreams of writing a novel, maybe something raw and true, like the books she edited. Our laughter mingled with quieter moments, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm, my hand resting on the small of her back. The intimacy was profound, not rushed, built on whispers and shared silences. As the night deepened, the barriers we'd clung to began to dissolve. We shed layers slowly, not just clothes but defenses, letting the connection take over. It wasn't about haste or conquest, it was careful, reverent, a dance of two people finding solace in each other's warmth. Her experience guided us, her confidence balancing my hesitance, while my youth brought a spark that made her eyes glow with something like wonder. In those moments, the 16 years between us faded. We were just Leora and Ellis, two souls meeting in a place beyond time. Dawn crept through the curtains, bathing the room in soft pinks and golds, and we lay tangled together, her breath steady against my chest. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice rough with the weight of mourning. She lifted her head, her hair mussed, her expression a blend of contentment and quiet sorrow. "Now, we face reality. Theo's back next week, and my work keeps me tethered here. We can't pretend this is simple." "I don't want simple," I said, surprising myself with the conviction. "I want this, us, whatever it can be, even if it's messy." She smiled, but it was tinged with caution. Messy is right. Small towns talk, and Theo, he'd struggle with this. So would my sister. We rose slowly, the morning light harsh after the softness of the night. Over coffee and toast in her kitchen, our knees brushing under the table,